My story is on disruptive mobility, and you might have heard this word. It's often used, or misused even, for things that change very fast, especially industries that are disrupted. It's often called the Kodak moment, and it happens specifically when digitization is taking place in a certain industry, that things change very much faster than anyone can imagine at this point. And it has to do with the exponential growth of electronics and the digital power, which is defined by Moore's law. Moore's law says that every 18 months computer power is doubled, and every 18 months this goes again and again and again, and that makes an exponential growth curve occur. And this is at this moment also happening to mobility. Now, this Moore's law is actually illustrated here in this picture that you see here. This is a 5 megabit hard drive in 1956. And 5 megabyte, as you know, that's one song on MP3. So here one song is uploaded in an airplane. And nobody around the time would have thought about making the music industry digital. We had a perfect analog example of alternative back then. Yet that happened, and it happened in a total way that also the record producers back then could not have foreseen. So that's actually what always happens. Also why Kodak has disappeared. When this electronics with digitization comes in, nobody knows exactly what's happening. And the first time when you see this digital technology, it's quite deceptive. So there's 6 Ds in this process. Because in this very unpredictable future, somehow you see a certain pattern, and it's the 6 Ds. So here's the deceptiveness. This first digital camera was huge. It had only 6 pixels, etc. So everybody said, nah, I see that's not going to work. Yet at a certain moment, it happens because this exponential curve starts to raise, and then the disruption is taking place. And what you always see, practically always, in any industry that's been hit by that, is that you see dematerialization. You don't need an encyclopedia. You don't need celluloid film, etc. Then the money goes out of the system. I cannot explain my children why I spend so much money on music as I did when I was younger. But also democratization takes place. It's not only the rich kids having access to these very expensive encyclopedias. There's a real democratization taking place at this moment. So the thing is that if digitization takes place, you can wait for these other 5 to occur. And this, my statement, my thesis is also that this happens in mobility at this moment. And the Kodak of mobility knows it. This General Motors CEO said that the auto industry will change more in the next 5 years than in the last 50 years. And yeah, exactly that's what's doing. Now, the thing is that this is because this car and also other vehicles are becoming digital. It's a computer on wheels. It's by far there are 50 times more lines of software code in a car compared to an airplane. The new Mercedes S-Class is first cars to pass 100 million lines of software code. 30% of which Mercedes do not know what it's doing there, but they are afraid to take it out because otherwise the system would collapse, etc. So that's the situation where we landed in. But the computing power is massive, massive of a car, even an average car. They put some wheels in it just to prevent that the computers are dragging over the surface of the street, so that's a rightful thing. But the mechanics in such a car are commodity. The real added value is in the software. Now, you hear a lot about connected, automotive, shared, and electric, and these are the 4 vehicles fueling this change. And especially this autonomous vehicles is something that everybody talks about. When you talk about disruption in the industry, it's always about this Google car. But before I say this, I want to first say that there's also another constant, and this is actually also for every industry that it's touched. There's a constant in what we, us as human beings, as biological machines, somehow want of a certain thing. So this is, in the case of mobility, it's also something there in our genes that we want to be mobile for 1 hour and 6 minutes per day. That's Marchetti, that was the first professor that found it out. And so this is all through history, and this is just one of the many researches on that, from the very poor country here on the left to the rich countries. You see it's always a little bit more than 1 hour that people are actively changing their position per day. So a lot of people say that mobility is just a means to get from A to B, to serve a purpose to get from A to B. That's not entirely true. People want to be mobile, it's a purpose on its own. And often people forget that. Don't forget it. So that's the thing. Even if you bring all the packages and the food and everything and all the colleagues to a certain person, he wants to go out for 1 hour per day. That's in our biology. What happens with this 1 hour, that's something that's changed on an exponential way. See, it's a logarithmic scale. It's the number of kilometers that we tend to move. This is then typically for France. They have a large, expensive hobby in high-speed rail. You can see that here. But you see that independent from the modality, we keep on traveling further and further and further. That's a strange thing, phenomena. And things can change quite rapidly. That's what you see here. The number of horses we ate in the beginning of last century apparently is big because certainly it disappeared here. That has to do because the horses had an environmental problem. They produced 15 kilograms of manure, 5 liters of urine. That's 20 kilograms of crap. And New York had 120,000 horses. 120,000 horses, each producing every day 20 kilograms. You do the math with that. So there came the big saver of the environment, the car, and it solved that problem. But okay, it keeps on changing. I already said, autonomous vehicles is something that everybody uses as an example of, in due course, when we all have autonomous vehicles, we don't need parking spots anymore. There's a lot of conclusions to that I try to question every now and then. Because this car has one huge problem. An autonomous car can, by definition, how smart it ever will get, especially this kind of autonomous car, this is no pedals in it, no steering wheel, this is a horizontal elevator. You get in somewhere, you get out somewhere else. But it is, by definition, not capable of flexibly interpreting the law. Let me say that again. This car cannot be programmed as such. Nobody will take the responsibility to at least break the law or flexibly interpret the law. We do not want artificial intelligence to flexibly interpret the law because they're going to be much smarter than us and then they come back and do some nasty stuff with us human beings. So that's something that's a no-go area. Also these cars. And if you do not flexibly interpret the law, you cannot drive through Boston. You have... Please, that's not a joke, that's really, you cannot survive traffic. In the Netherlands, you have to keep distance to another car of 2 seconds. The law says that. So if you want to enter a highway, you have to wait for a gap of 4 seconds in order to legally be able to enter that. That's only possible 2:30 in the night. So these cars will wait there. So these kind of things, that's a problem. So I don't think this totally thing is fit for urban traffic. It's going to worsen the situation. And we have all these empty cars driving around on top of the cars with people in it. That's not an improvement. Yet, we are working at our university with about 40 people, PhDs, on autonomous cars alone because it's coming rapidly, but in another shape. In cars that every now and then take over. That's come much faster than everybody expected. And if necessary, people can take over. Might it be for flexibly interpreting law or whatsoever. This is happening much faster. And it takes the burden out of commuting. And that's a threat, because then people start using the car more again, because it's even more comfortable than it was before. The other thing is that through connection of the car and through data, and this is my job at TomTom as well, it's just people inform each other and you have perfect traffic information. My thesis, again, is that traffic is going to be more and more a voluntarily and well-plannable event. Now, this is one thing that's happening. The other things that are happening is that cars are not only getting better, they're also getting safer and more environmentally clean. Cars are going to be inherently safe. Volvo already quoted. Our vision is that by 2020, nobody should be seriously injured or killed in a new Volvo car. And they also quote, buy a new Volvo car, by the way. It's not that they're killing everybody around the Volvo car just to save themselves. And the other thing is that cars are going, or maybe are already today, even if you talk about gasoline cars, are marginally polluting already today. New cars are not a polluting problem anymore. The tires pollute more. When the driver lights a cigarette, he pollutes more particles than the car itself. That's what we're talking about. But yet, cars are becoming electric anyhow because they are so cheap. Cars are getting very cheap, electric cars, especially because Musk has plans. This is his new battery fabric, and it's going to rapidly change the environment. It's the biggest building on the world that he's building at this moment. And it makes sure that you see on the left here that prices are dropping so much that electric cars are going to be the cheaper option already in 3 or 4 years. And what you get then is the demonetization taking place in mobility at this moment. 99 euros per month, 10 cents per kilometer. That's what cars are going to cost. And therefore, if you would already now, there's a huge threat because everybody can use cars, they can afford them, they don't have problems anymore. What if we all start even using cars more? Then the problem with the space are going to be bigger. And that's the thing that I want to end with, because that's the thing. You have to use Uber, share cars, all these kind of things. That's the thing that's the future of. So the car on itself, I do not see a future without cars, but we have to drive them much more sensibly as we do them, because there's a huge problem left over. We have to share these cars like Uber does at this moment. In New York, for 100 euros per month, you can drive unlimitedly Uber. That's the spotification of mobility, what's already happening today. We have a startup in Eindhoven that does 33 euros per week. They have made this purposely vehicle just for sharing, and they're going to be big in the future. Now, why I think, and that's my final point, I also want to equate, because these cars, the only problem that cars will have, that's my thesis, is not the environmental model, forget about that, that's not the problem, it's the place that they are going to take in a city. And of course, bikes are a very good alternative as well, and we stimulate them very well. The reason, and let me go a little bit faster with this is just what you see, what the government pays for people to be 1 kilometer mobile. And that's the essence. That's for the government the incentive to stimulate one or the other modality. And if you see here how expensive public transport is for a government, it cannot relate to the car or the bike or the air. Car is so cheap because people pay taxes for it. And that's the thing, if you even would add the ticket price and compare that with mobility as a service that was just already mentioned. This is Uber claiming for 30 cents per kilometer it will bring everybody from A to B. Then I think the future of public transport has some problems, but will look much more like Uber is looking at this moment instead of the classical bus train, unless they are very flexible in that thing and they start copying what Uber does now. And flexibility in routing is very hard for rail-bound systems, so that's a problem on its own. So just to end as a picture, that's what we work on, the future of urban systems. It should be, this is 3 times the same picture in Amsterdam. This is what we used to build it for. This is how it looked in the 70s and the 80s. And with all this smart mobility, sharing cars, more bikes, we can win the city back from the cars. This is actually something what we at this moment are, this is Shanghai at this moment, and we're helping them in order to make the step to this much more pleasant urban system. Because people want to come to cities in order to live and experience, not to look at cars. Thank you very much.